Steelers Nation, brace yourselves, because what happened at Acrisure Stadium wasn't just a win, it was an earthquake that completely shifted the direction of the season. The team took the field with an attitude nobody saw coming, and what was supposed to be just another matchup turned into a statement of strength that made the entire NFL stop and take notice. After a shaky start, the defense shut every door, turning pressure into impact and impact into points. It was intensity, it was identity, it was Pittsburgh at full power, right when the push to keep this campaign alive gets even tougher. So before we dive in, hit that like button if you lost your voice from yelling, and if you can, drop a comment saying, "Go Steelers." The crazy part is how quickly everything spiraled in-game. Aaron Rodgers goes down with a left wrist injury. Jaylen Warren gets banged up, tries to return, and eventually gets shut down. Cashin Williams leaves early with a concussion. Jalen Ramsey gets ejected after an altercation where video later shows Jamar Chase spitting on him, yet Ramsey is the one thrown out while Chase finishes the game untouched. It was absolute chaos, but somehow, out of all that turbulence, this team found clarity, found identity, found an edge we've been begging to see all season. And at the center of that shift stood Mason Rudolph, cold off the bench in brutal wind, stepping in like he had been preparing for this moment all year. Efficient, calm, on time, no panic, no hero ball, just smart, controlled football that kept the chains moving and allowed the defense to dictate the rest. Was he perfect? No, but he didn't need to be. He just needed to steer the ship while the defense took the wheel, and he did exactly that. And now, depending on Rodgers' evaluation during Tomlin Tuesday, there is at least a real conversation happening in this fan base about whether Rudolph could start next week if Rodgers needs time to heal. Still, the offense made it clear there's an issue that goes beyond whoever is under center. Too reliant on yards after the catch. Not enough separation down the field. DK Metcalf doubled constantly, Calvin Austin III struggling to make an impact, Roman Wilson flashing but not getting consistent opportunities. And because of all that, Jaylen Warren and Darnell Washington had to carry the early load. Then when Warren went down, Kenny Gainwell, like it's some kind of magic switch, turned into a different player. 7 catches, 81 receiving yards, leading the team in both categories. Gainwell stepping into Warren's role wasn't just helpful, it might have saved this offense from collapsing in the second half. But the true identity of this game, the heart of this entire story, is the defense. Kyle Duggar jumping a route and taking it back for 6. Brandon Echols punching a ball out that James Pierre scooped up for another touchdown. Joey Porter Jr. locking down on the boundary. And James Pierre, man, what more can you say? 10 targets, 30 yards allowed. Against Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. That's not good. That's elite. That's starter level. That's season-changing. And the coaching deserves as much praise as the players. Terrell Austin completely flipped the approach from Week 7. More press, less cushion, no free slants, more post-snap rotation, more physicality, more confidence. And with the way this group is playing right now, you can feel a shift, a real one, in how dangerous this team can be the rest of the way. And with all that momentum, the only cloud hanging over this performance might be the handling of the safety rotation. Chuck Clark saw the field over Jabril Peppers late, even though Clark has struggled throughout the season. With Ramsey ejected, it made sense that Clark had to step in, but still, Peppers feels like the more reliable option in those moments. It's a small detail in a game full of massive highs, but it's something this coaching staff is going to have to iron out if this defense wants to keep trending upward. So the Steelers walk out of this divisional matchup with confidence restored, the defense playing its best football of the year, the offense surviving injuries through sheer toughness and improvisation, and the team sitting exactly where it needs to be with Chicago up next. But here's the question that really matters right now, the one I want you to answer. After everything you just saw, the injuries, the defensive explosion, the quarterback shakeup, the emergence of guys like James Pierre and Kenny Gainwell, what's your biggest takeaway from this win? And when you zoom into the second half of this matchup, that's where the tone of the entire season feels like it shifted. Because the Steelers didn't just play complimentary football, they played suffocating football. The kind that takes a struggling opponent and absolutely buries them. And that matters, because for weeks this team has hovered in that middle ground where every win felt like a grind and every mistake felt fatal. Not this time. This was conviction. This was confidence. This was a team that finally understood how to close a game with authority. And a huge part of that was the way Terrell Austin unleashed this defense. Press coverage on the perimeter, safeties rotating into tighter windows, disguised pressure that forced Joe Flacco into checkdowns he didn't want to make. This wasn't passive. This wasn't bend don't break. This was calculated aggression, and the ripple effects were immediate. Jamar Chase neutralized. T. Higgins minimized. Flacco unable to push the ball downfield. And every time Cincinnati tried to regain momentum, Pittsburgh's defense slammed the door with another hit, another pressure, another opportunistic play. That's how you end up with a pick six from Kyle Duggar, a scoop and score from James Pierre, and a Cincinnati offense that looked nothing like the one that embarrassed Pittsburgh earlier in the season. And it's why James Pierre is suddenly one of the biggest stories on this roster. Because when a guy is targeted 10 times and gives up only 30 yards, and does it while shadowing receivers like Chase and Higgins, that's not accidental production. That's not a fluke. That's a statement that he deserves to be starting. A statement that even with Asante Samuel Jr. now in the building, the outside corner spot belongs to Pierre until someone proves otherwise. And while the defense took control, the offense had to survive the volatility. Losing Aaron Rodgers at the end of the first half created an immediate test of structure and composure. And this team didn't blink. Mason Rudolph might not have the arm talent or improvisational flair of Rodgers, but he brought exactly what the moment required: timing, rhythm, accuracy, and decision-making. He kept drives alive. He found his checkdowns early. He protected the football. And he respected the fact that the defense was taking over the game and didn't try to force anything unnecessary. But the most fascinating offensive dynamic came from the backfield. Jaylen Warren, before his injury, was again the tone setter, quick, physical, explosive after the catch. Then he goes down, tries to return, gets shut down, and suddenly Kenneth Gainwell flips a switch and becomes the engine of the offense. 7 catches, 81 yards, leading the team in receiving, breaking tackles, extending drives, generating explosive plays from simple dump-offs. And that's what makes this performance so interesting. Even with Rodgers hurt, even with Metcalf doubled, even with Austin quiet, the Steelers created offense by finding the guys who can create after the catch. Washington, Gainwell, Warren before the injury, that trio is the heartbeat of this attack right now. But there's still no avoiding the reality of the downfield passing issue. The Steelers must find a way to generate vertical opportunities. Because if defenses continue doubling Metcalf, and if neither Calvin Austin III nor Roman Wilson consistently separate, this offense becomes one-dimensional in a hurry. And that's why the quarterback debate, as much as fans love it, isn't the true core issue here. Whether it's Rodgers next week or Rudolph stepping in again, the structure of this offense needs to evolve, and fast, if Pittsburgh wants to maximize the defensive surge that's happening on the other side of the ball. And that brings us to the final stretch of the season. Chicago next. Caleb Williams facing a Mike Tomlin defense for the first time. A Bears team that has struggled with discipline against heavy personnel. And then Buffalo, a matchup built for Pittsburgh's physicality if the Steelers stay healthy up front. This is the stretch that determines whether this team is just better than average, or something more dangerous than anyone thought a month ago. So now that we've broken down the chaos, the injuries, the emergence of key contributors, and the evolution of this defense, here's what I want to know as we close this out. After seeing this team finally put together a dominant, complete victory, do you believe this version of the Steelers is capable of making a real playoff run? Click subscribe, hit the like button, and stick around. Your next video is already on the screen. And when you look ahead from this moment, you can feel how much this single game might end up defining the stretch run. Because what Pittsburgh showed wasn't just resilience, it was adaptability, and that's what separates playoff-caliber teams from everyone else. They didn't crumble when Rodgers went down. They didn't lose their identity when Warren exited. They didn't fold when the officiating chaos surrounding Jalen Ramsey's ejection threatened to tilt the game. Instead, they recalibrated. They tightened up. They leaned into the strengths that emerged right in front of them. And that's where this gets really interesting, because the coaching staff deserves real recognition for the adjustments they made, not just schematically, but philosophically. Terrell Austin trusted his corners to play tight, physical football on the outside. He trusted his safeties to disguise looks and challenge the Bengals' timing. He trusted his front to get home even without blitzing heavily. That kind of confidence in your personnel is something we did not see earlier in the year, and it changed everything. Meanwhile, the offensive staff leaned into the reality of the moment instead of forcing a script. With Rudolph in, they didn't ask him to replicate Rodgers, they built the attack around what he does best. Quick decisions, high-percentage throws, letting the playmakers turn short gains into long ones. It wasn't flashy, but it was smart. It played into the strengths of Washington and Gainwell, who basically became the offense's version of a spark plug and a pressure valve. And it worked because they didn't try to be something they're not. That's what great coaching looks like, not perfection, but clarity. But we also can't ignore the long-term implications of what happened in the secondary. James Pierre wasn't just good, he looked like one of the most reliable corners in football over these last 3 weeks. And that creates a ripple effect nobody saw coming. The Steelers suddenly have a corner playing at a near-elite level on the boundary. Joey Porter Jr. continuing to grow on the opposite side. Jalen Ramsey operating as a physical enforcer when he's on the field. And now Asante Samuel Jr. waiting for his turn. The depth, the versatility, the matchup flexibility, it all gives this defense a chance to become the identity of this team heading into December. But the trust issues with Chuck Clark still linger, and that's a storyline that could surface again if injuries force the staff to make tough decisions in critical moments. Peppers has the energy, the range, and the instincts to become the next man up, and the fact that he wasn't used more heavily today raises a legitimate question. What exactly does the staff see in Clark that they don't see in Peppers? If the defense keeps trending upward, that might be the last remaining weak spot opponents try to attack. And now everything turns toward Chicago, a game that, on paper, Pittsburgh should control. But it's also the exact kind of game that tests whether this version of the Steelers is real. Can they stack performances? Can the defense maintain this standard? Can the offense function through uncertainty with Rodgers' wrist under reevaluation? Can the run game continue producing explosive plays even if Warren is limited? Can Roman Wilson earn more targets? Can the team keep leaning into what's actually working instead of forcing what isn't? Those answers will shape everything, not just for next week, but for the Bills' matchup, the division race, and the playoff path that is very much still alive. If you're still here, you already know what comes next. Before you head into the next breakdown, make sure you're subscribed, drop a like to keep this show growing, and tap the video that's popping up on your screen right now. I'll meet you over there. And as we pivot fully into what this performance means for the rest of the season, the true weight of this moment starts to settle in. Because this wasn't just a strong outing, it was the clearest blueprint we've seen all year for how the Steelers can win consistently. A defense that dictates style, tempo, and momentum. An offense that leans into physicality and yards after the catch instead of forcing deep shots that aren't there. A coaching staff that finally embraced the idea of adjusting around its roster instead of trying to fit players into a rigid formula. And the timing of that evolution could not be better. Chicago is a crossroads game. Teams with real playoff aspirations don't stumble in these spots. They capitalize. They stomp. They take the confidence of a blowout win and turn it into a streak. And right now, Pittsburgh has everything it needs to do exactly that. A defense playing with swagger, a secondary that's suddenly a strength again, a front that's getting more coordinated pressures even without heavy blitzing, and a locker room that feels more united than it has in weeks. The Rodgers situation adds intrigue, but not panic. If he's cleared, the offense immediately gets its starter back with a chance to push the ball a bit more against a Chicago defense that's vulnerable to misdirection and layered route concepts. If he's not ready, Rudolph already proved he can step in and run this system with composure. There's no sense of crisis, just preparation and purpose. And that's a massive shift from the uncertainty earlier this season. But the big storyline to watch, the one that could define the next month, is whether this offense can build on what Washington, Warren, and Gainwell created. Because that trio, more than anything else, gave the Steelers an identity when the passing game sputtered. Washington's physicality is becoming a weekly weapon. Warren's toughness and explosiveness set the tone before his injury, and Gainwell's sudden transformation into a high-volume, chain-moving receiver out of the backfield came at the perfect moment. If those three continue to be the engine of the offense, it buys Rodgers or Rudolph time for the vertical game to develop, and it keeps defenses honest. And defensively, this is the first time all year where the Steelers truly look like a Mike Tomlin team, aggressive, opportunistic, suffocating when it matters, and absolutely relentless in the second half. If Pierre continues this level of play, if Porter keeps growing, if Ramsey returns without suspension issues, and if Duggar keeps settling into his role, there's a legitimate chance this defense becomes one of the most difficult units to game plan against down the stretch. You add that to a playoff race where teams like Buffalo, Miami, and Houston all have exploitable weaknesses, and suddenly Pittsburgh doesn't just look like a team trying to survive, they look like a team capable of punching back. So before you jump into the next film breakdown, hit that subscribe button to stay locked in with every update, drop a like so more Steelers fans find this conversation, and click the video that's now on your screen. We're going deeper into what this win means for Rodgers, Rudolph, and the offensive direction heading into Chicago. And as we push this story toward its final arc, the significance of what happened against Cincinnati becomes even clearer. Because every season has a moment, a pivot point, where a team either discovers who it really is or quietly fades back into the middle of the pack. And what we watched wasn't just a win, it was a discovery, a recalibration of identity that could carry this team all the way through December. You could feel it in the way the defense communicated, in the way the secondary trusted each other snap after snap, In the way the pass rush didn't need splash plays to influence the game, they just squeezed the pocket, kept Flacco uncomfortable, cut off his reads, and let the turnovers arrive naturally. That is the sign of a defense growing into something dangerous. Not desperate, dangerous. Because desperate teams gamble, dangerous teams impose. Pittsburgh imposed. And on offense, even with all the chaos, you could finally see what this scheme looks like when it leans into its strengths instead of chasing an identity that isn't there yet. The creativity with Washington, the patience with Gainwell, the reliance on timing and spacing rather than deep shots that weren't developing. The understanding that sometimes the smartest offense is the one that simply refuses to put its defense in bad positions. That's maturity, and Pittsburgh hasn't shown that kind of maturity consistently until now. But perhaps the most telling sign of growth came from the sideline. There was no panic when Rodgers went down, no confusion when Warren left the game, no unraveling after Ramsey was ejected. Instead, you saw players stepping into roles, coaches adjusting on the fly, and a team that genuinely believed it could lean on its structure instead of individuals. That's the difference between surviving a season and building momentum that carries into January. And this momentum matters, because the next two opponents tell us everything we need to know. Chicago presents a rookie quarterback who's about to face the most disguised, most physical, most unpredictable version of Tomlin's defense he's seen all year. Then Buffalo, a team that struggles with physical run fronts and heavy personnel, exactly what Pittsburgh thrives in when Warren and Washington are healthy and the offensive line is moving bodies. If the Steelers capitalize, they enter the final stretch above .500 with confidence and with a defense playing like it can go toe-to-toe with anyone. If they stumble, everything becomes uphill again. That's the weight of this moment. So before you jump into the next deep dive video, make sure you hit subscribe, tap the like button to help this grow, and click the video that's now appearing on your screen. We're breaking down exactly how the Steelers can carry this defensive surge into Chicago and what needs to happen with Rodgers and Rudolph heading into Week 12. And if we're being honest, this is exactly the kind of stretch that has defined so many Mike Tomlin seasons in the past. That late November moment when the team either sharpens into a legitimate contender or reveals the cracks that were hiding beneath early season wins. What's different this time is how quickly the identity on defense has solidified, and how the offense has managed to stay functional even while dealing with injuries, inconsistency, and a constantly shifting game plan. Because what Pittsburgh showed against Cincinnati wasn't luck. It wasn't a fluke game where turnovers fell into their lap. It was the product of a defense that finally trusts its assignments and communicates with precision. A defense that now understands how to work in layers, pressure from the front collapsing the pocket, linebackers closing windows underneath, the secondary squeezing receivers at the snap. That synchronized effort is what allowed James Pierre to thrive. It's what allowed Joey Porter Jr. to play with confidence. It's what made Kyle Duggar's pick six feel almost inevitable the moment Flacco released the ball. And that trust is why this unit feels sustainable. Because it's not one superstar carrying the load, it's the entire group operating with the same intention on every snap. Meanwhile, the offense is quietly finding something that has eluded them most of the season: rhythm. Not necessarily explosive plays, not a vertical threat every drive, but a rhythm, a manageable pace that keeps them out of third and long situations and allows the playmakers to do the heavy lifting. Washington's physicality, Gainwell's sudden burst as a receiver, Warren's energy when healthy, that trio gives the offense a floor that doesn't collapse when the quarterback changes or when defenses take away the deep ball. And that floor matters, because it keeps this team competitive even when things aren't perfect. Rodgers gives you more vertical juice, but even if he needs another week, the structure around Rudolph is finally stable enough to function without panic. That wasn't the case earlier in the year. That development alone should give fans confidence heading into Chicago. But one of the biggest under-the-radar storylines as we move forward is how the coaching staff manages snap counts and personnel now that the defensive backs are playing at this level. Does Pierre remain the unquestioned starter on the outside? He should. Does Ramsey slide right back into his hybrid role once reinstated? Absolutely. But what happens behind them? Does Peppers get the snaps he deserves? Does Samuel gradually rotate in, or stay in waiting until an opportunity naturally opens? These are the decisions that will shape the depth and versatility of the defense down the stretch. Because make no mistake, if this defense continues on this trajectory, the Steelers aren't just fighting for a playoff spot. They're fighting to become the kind of team nobody wants to see in January. The kind that hits you for 4 quarters, forces turnovers, shortens games, and drags opponents into a style they can't match. And if the offense continues to grow, even modestly, it's enough. Now we shift into the most revealing part of the schedule. a rookie quarterback, a physical Buffalo team, a Ravens race still looming in the distance. This next stretch tells us if the Steelers are simply surviving, or if they're evolving into the version of themselves they've been searching for all season. Before you jump into the next breakdown, hit subscribe, drop a like, and click the video that's now appearing on your screen. We're diving deeper into what this defensive surge really means for the rest of the year and how the Steelers can keep building on this momentum. And as we push this storyline forward, the deeper truth starts to reveal itself. This wasn't just a rebound win. This was the first time all season the Steelers looked like a team that understands exactly who they are and how they need to play to win meaningful football games. And that realization doesn't come from a single big play or a fortunate bounce. It comes from a team finally aligning its strengths, its personnel, and its identity all at once. Because watch how the defense operated, not just in big moments, but in the quiet, hidden plays between the splash highlights. You could see Joey Porter Jr. trusting his technique, staying patient at the line, squeezing receivers to the boundary like a corner who has grown leaps from week one. You could see the confidence in James Pierre every time he pressed up, every time he triggered downhill, every time he refused to give Jamar Chase or T. Higgins easy access into their routes. That's not talent alone, that's understanding the system, understanding leverage, understanding timing. And that's why this defensive surge feels real. It's not streaky, it's not fluky, it's foundational. What Kyle Duggar did, reading the quarterback, trusting the rotation, breaking with decisiveness, is exactly the kind of play this team wasn't producing earlier in the season. What Brandon Echols did, forcing that fumble, allowing Pierre to scoop and score, was exactly the kind of complementary football this unit had been missing. And even though Chuck Clark still feels like the one piece that isn't fully fitting, the overall cohesion of the group has reached a level that gives the Steelers a real chance to control games on their terms. That's why the Chicago matchup suddenly looks less like a trap game and more like an opportunity. Because young quarterbacks, especially those facing this defense for the first time, struggle against disguised rotations, late safety movement, and corners who refuse to give clean releases. If Pittsburgh brings this exact intensity and clarity into that game, it's hard to imagine the Bears' offense finding rhythm early. And if the Steelers can start fast defensively, they can dictate the flow of the entire afternoon. And on offense, the identity is starting